Hey there, guys, and happy Friday or TGIF. I'm delighted you're able to join me again this evening. Thank you to all of the viewers, the guests, and the supporters of the Indie Spotlight. You know we couldn't do this without you. I'm your host, SHAYRENEE, and take a look at the two links in my Instagram bio. The first one is for the Indie Spotlight Philly YouTube. Like, share, subscribe, and comment on the Indie Spotlight Philly YouTube channel. It's about 80 to 85 episodes uploaded so far of very, very interesting, influential influencers, celebrities, indie artists, restaurateurs, teachers, mentors, everything. Go check out the Indie Spotlight Philly YouTube, and also check out the Indie Spotlight Philly podcast, available on Anchor.fm, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Okay, guys? Now, tonight's episode of the Indie Spotlight Philly, happening on Instagram Live at 7:30 p.m. EST, will be another special one. We have music industry professor at the New Haven University, and music business and music artist and a music business consultant, Mark Tavern. And he's in the room right now, and I'm going to invite him to the camera and start the interview. Okay. Hi.
Hey, how are you?
How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks.
Great. So first, I want to tell you thank you for being very reachable. I'm glad you're able to do the interview with the Indie Spotlight Philly. So thank you.
I'm glad to be here. Should be fun.
Great. So could you tell me where you're from?
So originally, I grew up in upstate New York, in central New York, Richfield Springs, which is near Cooperstown, sort of between Syracuse and Albany.
Oh, okay, great. And you, could you tell everybody what you do? You're an artist manager. You're also a music business consultant, and you are also a music industry professor at New Haven University, right? Is that in Connecticut?
Yes, in West Haven, Connecticut, and that's primarily what I'm doing now. As I just today is my second day of classes. I took a full-time role there as a practitioner in residence. So I'm doing that full-time. I'm doing a little bit of management, a little consulting, on top of that. And I also, in addition to the University of New Haven, I also teach a music business class at LaGuardia Community College, which is part of CUNY in New York City.
Wow. So you have over 20 years worth of experience in music business and music industry, and you have been a part of some really, like some projects with some major artists. So could you also tell people, so before we dive in with the questions and stuff like that, could you tell people where they can find you at on social media?
So you can find me everywhere at Mark Tavern, including marktavern.com, my website. Yeah. So I'm pretty easy. All the handles are the same.
Okay, so that's marktavern.com and Twitter and Instagram.
Yes.
Okay. Before I asked a few questions about music industry and music business, what is some of the best advice you would give to a new artist or entertainer?
I guess that, I would say that they should understand what a special and interesting time it is to be in the music business, because there are so many tools and choices that are available to them that didn't exist when I first got into the business. That can be both a very liberating and also a very frustrating experience, and they need to be able to understand that the tools can make it easier for them, but they need to approach them in a way to keep themselves from being really overwhelmed. It can be an overwhelming experience, so they kind of have to understand both sides of that coin.
Yeah, so I notice like a lot of things in music and entertainment is taking a very independent approach and a very technology approach, meaning like it's a do-it-yourself phenomenon happening. And I always say, or I always suggest if I talk or give advice to another artist, that everything in order to make you successful in the music industry is not going to happen with just you, even though we make it look that way with YouTube and tutorials and all this other type of stuff. You still need managers, you still need artist managers, you still need tools to help you along the way, you know.
I would agree that, you know, there was a period where we talked about DIY, but we talked about
Mm-hmm.
it in a way that I think that made a lot of artists feel like it was all on them, and
Mm-hmm.
that they were alone. And you know, I try and say to my students, you know, DIY doesn't, it doesn't have to mean do it yourself. It
Mm-hmm.
You really need to think about it in terms of the amount of control that it gives you. And if
Mm-hmm.
that means that you want to hire, and have the ability to hire someone to run a marketing campaign on your behalf, do that. If you want to hire a playlisting company, you know, a legitimate playlisting company to help you with that aspect of your business, there's nothing wrong with that. And if you have the capacity, and you have it in your budget, you should definitely do so. You shouldn't feel as if you have to do everything, because we can't be experts at everything. And there are lots
Right.
of people out there now, and this is what's so interesting about the tools. They're not available just for the artist. They're available to the manager and the PR
Mm-hmm.
person and the playlister. Everyone has access to these things, and
Yeah.
so it's easier for people to help you.
Yeah. 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 And then some things, in music and in promotion, you do have to pay for. So, but what I want to ask is, what is some of the biggest ripoffs that music industry experts or music industry people have offered to artists that didn't do anything for their career?
I think you have to be very careful now. I mean, I get links all the time. You know, people sliding into my, you know, Instagram DMs saying like, "Buy Spotify plays." You know, I've heard your music. Really? Like, I I don't. I'm not an artist. I don't have music. So you know, if that's not a giveaway, I don't know what is. But I think that everyone, it's easy to think, and you had sort of alluded to this, the idea that we try and make it look easy, and try and make it look like we did it when when maybe there were, you know, people behind us. And I think that that means that a lot of people look for shortcuts, and so they
Hmm.
think like, oh, I can buy Spotify plays, I can buy likes, and that will help me. But the reality is that A&R is still being done through the process of a human listening to you. And if you buy a bunch of plays, or if you buy a bunch of social engagement, and that attracts an A&R to you, if they're truly a real A&R, they're going to see that that's fake, because they're going to want to come to a show, or they're going to, you know, visit a live stream, and they're going to see that that audience that you appear to have doesn't show up. And
Hmm.
and that's going to expose you. And so that's dangerous. You know, you don't want to take the risk. You don't want to give up that money and get scammed.
Hmm.
So I think that that's a dangerous one. I think the other dangerous one is the A&R, the fake A&R scout who reaches out. You know, you've seen these scams that are like, you know, the email address is, you know, RCA, you know, RCA
Hmm.
A&R scout at gmail.com. I worked at
Hmm.
RCA, and the domain name is not gmail.com. So if somebody's reaching out to you and that's their domain, that should be a sign that maybe they're not, maybe they don't work for RCA or whatever company they say they are. And if they say, "Oh, you just have to pay a certain amount of money, and like we'll fly you someplace, or we'll have, you know, we'll have a a session where we listen to your music," if you are paying up front for that kind of service, that's a scam, because a real A&R is paid. That's their job. to actually go out and do that. And if they're trying to get you to, they're charging you to listen to your music, they're scamming you.
Right, right. So that is some good tips. I hope everybody is out there listening to that. I also want to ask, what got you interested in in doing artist management?
So I had been working at record companies, major labels for a long time, and I did A&R administration. So I planned the recording sessions with the, side by side with the creative people, the A&R, the producer, the engineer, and the artist. And I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed being part of that process. And what I thought I brought to it was that I understood creatively what was going on. I could speak to everyone involved, but I also understood how to get a project done. How do we budget for this? How do we make sure that it happens on time? And
Mm-hmm.
how can I manage those logistics with all of those people in a way that makes that creative success happen? And by the mid to late 2000s, I think that majors in a lot of ways are looking outside the record company for artist development, for A&R support, and producers. Their role in many ways has changed during my career, from one in which they're kind of the hired gun to where they're developing their own stable of artists. And so record companies were looking to producers to be A&R sources for them. And I was thinking, if I want to continue to do this job, I should go and do it for a producer. I should plan their recording sessions. And so I started to think about that. And then I talked to an artist. I ran into an artist that I'd worked with years and years and years ago. And we got talking, and I found out he was looking for management, and I was looking for this change in role. And we kind of both realized at the same time that we were both talking about artist management. And so that was kind of my moment to leave the record business and go and do artist management. I got lucky in some way that I had a client kind of come to me.
Mm-hmm. Right. So, first, how many artists are you managing currently?
Currently, I have a very, very small roster right now. I have a couple of clients with whom I consult, a couple of hip hop groups, a classical new contemporary music composer, but I'm trying to maintain only a very small number of artists, just because my teaching schedule now in full time is that's a lot of work all by itself.
Sure, sure. So what are some of the names of the artists that you are, if you would like to share with us, the artists that you're working with?
So the artist that I first started working with was a jazz artist named Dave Douglas, who's pretty well known, played 150 nights a year. And that was a great experience for me to get started with. And then I worked with a couple of singers, Gracie Terzian being one. And now I'm working, the composer is Ralph Ferris, who's part of a well-known contemporary music ensemble called Ethel. And then I've done a little consulting with a couple of hip-hop artists, Fame and P.C. Being one, John Hope being another. I like consulting because it's an opportunity for me to kind of dive into a specific project or give a very limited amount of advice that can be very consequential for an artist in a given moment, and not have to commit to a long-term relationship with them. And sometimes early in their career, the artist doesn't need that. So I'd like to be able to kind of find a little bit of a business where I can consult in that way. You can call me and I can jump in, give you some very specific advice about a specific problem that you're trying to solve, and then you can go and execute based on that. And you get the benefit of having a manager, with experience, give you some background, but that you don't, you're not tied contractually for a long time.
Great. And so I know you've been working in music industry and music business for a long time. What are some, is there any famous artists or well-known artists that you have worked beside or worked with?
So going back, I've worked on probably 200 records throughout my career. So at RCA, RCA Victor, RCA Jive. I was at the Sony labels for a long time. So there's lots of RCA companies that I worked for. I was also at Island Def Jam. And so, in terms of credits, records that I've worked on, if we go back to RCA, I was working on the first couple of seasons of American Idol. So the first couple of Kelly Clarkson records, the first couple of Clay Aiken records. I worked on Mario and Monica when I was at RCA. I worked on Tyrese's album Alter Ego. There were some Carrie Underwood records that I did a little work on. I worked on Whitney Houston's last album. And then when I was at Island Def Jam, I worked on records by The Killers, by Justin Bieber, by The Roots, Melissa Etheridge, Chrisette Michele. And then there's a whole bunch of classical records and jazz records that I worked on, and then Broadway cast albums, which was always a lot of fun. Like in my first role in planning these recording sessions, there were a bunch of Broadway cast albums, including the revival of Cabaret, Urinetown, Avenue Q.
Urinetown. My niece actually did a play for that at her school at Palumbo. Wow.
It's a great musical, and it's being a part of those sessions is really exciting because they may have finished writing it just a week before or 2 weeks before. It only opened a couple of days before you do the cast album, so you're really capturing. That recording session is about documenting a moment in history, and I think that that's a really fascinating thing.
Yeah. So all the artists that you have worked with, did you met them as you were working with them?
It depends from project to project. There are some a lot of the records, classical records and jazz records, where the artist is producing themselves. I would deal directly with the artist. Some other records, I would deal with their management. And then, it kind of depends, and then very often there was a lot of close contact between myself and the producers that they're hiring and the engineers that they're hiring. So it really depends on the project and who's running point on the creative side.
Right. Okay. And do you have, now I think I asked you that question with some of the best advice for artists, but do you have any music business or industry business advice? Let's say you want to start being an artist. Is that when you first start being an artist or first trying to become an artist, is it important for you to have an artist manager? What are some of the duties that, like, a new artist just getting into this, who should they have on their team? What should they be doing?
Honestly, I don't think that their first team member has to be a manager.
Okay.
And sometimes I don't think it should be. Very often the first team member is an attorney, because the artist has had a deal put in front of them. And the contract, I think that this is an important thing to understand. Getting that contract, by putting that contract in front, or having that contract be put in front of you, is kind of a sign that you've got some business, right? Like something's happening. And you don't need a manager at that moment. You should call an attorney and have an attorney look over that contract for you. But that attorney knows lots of managers. And if you continue to call that attorney and say, like, oh, here's another deal, or here's another contract that we need to do, or I have this thing happening and I need your advice, they're going to say to their management friends, I'm working with this client who, like, they need a manager now. And so the more business that you can create on your own, the more interest is going to be kind of organically generated on your behalf. And I think that requires some patience, but I think it's also important to understand that, we have this fairy tale idea of the record business, of the A&R who's going to find you in the club and sign you, and suddenly you're going to be a star. And the reality is that doesn't happen. And the manager isn't going to find you in that way. The A&R isn't going to find you in that way. You have to make that business happen yourself. And if you can, two things happen. You get clout, so that when they do put a deal in front of you, you can negotiate for better terms. And two, you know how to do some of these things so that you know if that manager's doing a good job.
Yeah, a music industry, I noticed you're an entrepreneur, you're a salesperson, and you're self-made when you're like an artist and stuff. A lot of stuff that you're funding to make your project is funded by you. So proactivity is a huge thing in there. There's a huge thing with that. Is there, so I also want to ask, do you have any, well, right now you're actively teaching. So what I will ask is there anybody in music business or any artists that you wish you could collaborate with? And if you do, does anyone come to mind?
Well, I would say, I think sometimes I think about like records that I wish I'd worked on. And I was at Def Jam when Kanye made My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy. And that's a record that I really like. I think that's a masterpiece. And so that's a record that I wish that I'd been able to work on, just to be a part of the creation of that, of some kind of creative statement. I think that is that big. So that's definitely one that I think about from time to time, having kind of been near it, like my colleagues worked on it. I didn't. That would be one that I wish that, I'd been able to be a part of.
Wow. That's a great choice. So before I wrap up the interview, I wanted to ask you if there was any other things that you wanted to add before wrapping up everything.
I guess that, in terms of the music business, and I told my students this today, it's changing all the time. And in fact, I said that there are things about the music business that will change while the semester takes place, so that something will be different between now and Christmas. And and I know that can be exhausting to keep up with, but I think that that's a really exciting thing. And it really shows how much an individual artist has to learn about the business, and actually, as a result of that, how empowering it can be. That there's so much information out there and so many people able and willing to help that you can take part in the business now in a way that maybe you couldn't previously. So I think that that's a really interesting thing.
Right. Well, with that being said, I want to say thank you, Mark, for coming on. Thank you, Mark Tavern, Mr. Tavern, for coming on the Indie Spotlight Philly and joining me. And I want to say thank everybody who watched. Can you tell everybody where they can find you at one last time? And then we can wrap up.
Sure. You can find me at marktavern.com. I spend a lot of time on Twitter. My handle is @marktavern. I'm on Instagram as well. I have a monthly newsletter.
Okay.
You can sign up for. If you go to marktavern.com, you can sign up for that. I published the most recent piece yesterday, and so if you want to get that, you can shoot me an email or you can sign up. That can come to you. I've put out a couple of ebooks recently. One about writing bios, one about booking your own tour. You can get those on my website as well.
So you can all get those on Amazon, you said?
At marktavern.com.
Oh, or marktavern.com, you can get one that tells artists how to write their bios, which is a really important thing.
Yes.
And also about how to schedule their own tours, you said?
How to book your own tour.
Wow, how to book your own tour. So that's some really, really good stuff. Well, thank you, Mark. Thank you for coming. Thank everyone for watching. And I hope you have a good night.
Thank you. You too. It's great to be here.
Thank you so much. Awesome. Great to have you.
Okay, take care.
You too.